My name is Madeline Cooper. This morning at 6:12 a.m., I woke up to 17 missed calls and one email from a law office. The calls were from my mother, my father, and my younger sister Bailey. They hadn't asked if I was alive or dead in 4 years, and now suddenly they urgently needed my help. No apology, no concern, just a document proposing a private settlement before the lawsuit gets out of hand. They had erased me from every photo, every family gathering, every memory. But they couldn't erase what I had quietly built. Have you ever been discarded by your own family, and then one day they came back? Not to apologize, but to demand what they once mocked? If you've ever endured in silence, if you've ever been pushed aside, leave a comment below, like and subscribe to this channel so we can walk through this story together. From a tiny rented room to the day I stood up and stopped asking for permission to exist, Bailey is 4 years younger than me, and for as long as I can remember, she's been the center of every celebration, every conversation, every expectation. She has a bright smile, knows exactly how to charm adults, and captivates social media followers with ease. And me? I was always behind the scenes, the one setting the table, the one editing the words, the one designing the early lesson plans that later became what Bailey named Bailey's Bright Steps Academy. A name that rings out but never once credited the person who wrote every line. I wasn't jealous of her, truly. I once loved Bailey with the full softness of an older sister. I spent hours helping her edit college essays, stepped out of photos because she said I ruined the overall vibe. I believed that if I just stepped back a little, just avoided dimming her light, the family would stay calm, she'd be happy, and maybe I'd finally be accepted. But that's not how it went. That Thanksgiving dinner was the last time I ever had a seat at the family table. Everyone was enjoying my mother's roast turkey, and Bailey was talking about being invited to speak at a statewide education conference. I sat quietly most of the evening, as usual. Then my father asked, "And what about you, Maddie? How's your work going?" I responded gently, "I've been building an online learning platform for struggling students, using Grandma's old curriculum and adapting it into a personalized guidance model." Just one sentence, but the room went silent. Bailey put down her silverware and turned to me. Her eyes were red, not from emotion, but from anger. "You always do this. You wait until something good happens for me and then jump in. You're sabotaging my work, you know that?" I didn't understand. I hadn't even mentioned the platform's name. I hadn't said anything that overlapped with hers. I just wanted to share a little about what I was doing, one of the rare times someone had asked. But she didn't let me speak another word. "You used to steal my things when we were kids, and now you're doing it again. You can't stand it when I'm the one getting recognition. You're jealous. You've always been the shadow, and you hate it." Each word hit me like a stone through glass. Loud, shattering, but with pain that settled deep and quiet. I looked at my father. He stared down at his plate, pushing a carrot around with his fork, saying nothing. I turned to my mother. She dabbed her mouth with a napkin, stood up from her chair, and looked at me with a calm coldness I still can't unsee. "Bailey's right. You always make the whole family feel heavy." Then she sat back down like she had just stated a fact. I said nothing more. I placed my napkin on the table, pushed back my chair, and walked out of the dining room. No one called after me. No one got up. Not a single person asked where I was going that night. I only heard Bailey scoff behind me, and the wooden chair legs scrape the floor. They didn't need me there, and I didn't have the strength to stay. I went into the living room, grabbed a few small things I kept in my old crossbody bag, the one I always brought on holidays, knowing I'd never be offered the guest room again. That room had long since become Bailey's storage closet. I slipped out the back door. There was no snow that night, but the wind tore right through my thin coat. I walked more than 2 blocks to the nearest bus stop, no ticket in hand, no plan. Just a silence that wrapped around my chest like a rope pulled too tight. I used to think the family would realize they were wrong, that someone would call, say it was just a heat-of-the-moment fight, that my mother would regret siding with the one who yelled instead of the one who stayed quiet. But that never happened. No apologies, no messages afterward. Not one person asked where I lived, what I did, whether I was still breathing. They moved on with their lives like I never existed. And Bailey, she kept expanding her academy, one lesson at a time, one learning tool at a time, all based on materials I had once quietly written. I vanished from the family story like a misprint left out of the final draft, gently erased. But the pain wasn't gentle. It sank to the bottom of my chest and stayed there, pressing, without needing to be mentioned to feel real. I lived in a tiny motel room off the highway on the outskirts of Eugene, Oregon. The neon sign had half its letters burned out, blinking each night like it was trying to survive itself. Room 4. Pale yellow walls, blotched and peeling. The smell of bleach clashed with musty pillows. I rented by the week, paid in cash. No one asked where I came from or how long I'd stay. That brought a strange relief, but also a silence so heavy it felt like standing still in fog. I worked as an online tutor from the local public library 2 blocks away, where there was free Wi-Fi and a handful of worn-out Chromebooks for guest use. Each morning, I'd stop at the corner cafe and get a small coffee for $1.25, which came with unlimited refills. I'd sit for hours at the one table near the only reliable outlet. I didn't teach much, just a few sessions a week, mostly helping students prep for the SAT or GED, sometimes assisting adults relearning how to write. No one knew I had once served as an academic consultant for a charter school in Denver. No one needed to know. I had grown used to being unseen. One December afternoon, while editing a reading module for a high school student named Marcus, my phone buzzed gently in my coat pocket. I almost ignored it, thinking it was just a promo or tutoring platform update. But it was a notification from the package tracking service I'd used 2 years ago. Birthday gift to Veronica Cooper, delivered, unopened. I froze. I remembered that gift clearly. A small box wrapped in delicate floral paper. Inside was a gift card to my mother's favorite downtown coffee shop and a handwritten letter I'd spent a week crafting. I sent it 6 months after leaving home, back when I still believed something could be repaired. The letter simply said I missed her, missed those quiet Sunday mornings making coffee together, and that if she was willing, I wanted to start again. Slowly, I wrote, "If there's still a space in your heart for me, I'd like to sit there again, not asking for much, just to be called by name again." I remember my hands trembling as I finished. I folded it neatly, placed it beside the gift card, sealed it with the rounded cursive she used to praise when I was a child. I still had the receipt from the post office, taped inside the cover of my notebook. To remind myself, I tried. But for 2 years, that box sat somewhere in my mother's home, untouched, not opened, not thrown away, as if it wasn't worthy of being read, but also not significant enough to toss, left in limbo, forgotten on purpose. I stared at the notification on my phone until the screen went dark. Then I opened it again and again, as if I could read something different between the lines. I didn't know what hurt more, that they never opened my birthday gift, or that I still hoped they would, that after all this time I was still waiting. I used to believe that if I just behaved, stayed quiet, caused no trouble, they would see me. I tried to do everything right, lowered my voice, stepped back, chose letters instead of phone calls because I thought writing would feel gentler, easier to receive. But no, their answer was silence, so cold it froze through ink and paper. I placed my phone down on the chipped wood table, gripping the strap of my bag like it was the last thread holding me upright. The room was utterly still, save for the whir of the old heater. I could hear my own heartbeat. Heavy, slow. I didn't cry. I wasn't angry. I just felt like someone was squeezing the air out of me without ever touching my skin. Maybe they never read me. Not really. Not just the letter, but me, my thoughts, my feelings, my effort. Maybe no one in my family had ever truly read me with care. I was the caption beneath their story, the blurred-out footnote to Bailey's spotlight. I looked out the window where the last light of the day touched the faded curtains, the same curtains I pulled open every morning to remind myself a new day was starting. But that evening, I didn't pull them. I just sat there, letting the light fade, and wondered if one day I no longer existed, would anyone even notice I had once been here? I didn't send letters anymore. I didn't send anything. I poured myself into work like maybe, if I kept my hands busy long enough, my heart would stop aching. Every morning, I threw on my old coat, stopped by the coffee shop across the street for a hot black coffee, just warm enough to keep my palms from freezing, and walked to the public library like it was the only place left on earth, with a seat meant for me. I tutored all kinds of students, high school kids, young adults trying to earn their GED, even older folks brushing up on their reading to apply for jobs. No one asked where I studied, where I came from. No one knew I had written the original curriculum for a private education center chain in the South. Now I was just another quiet name on the list of low-cost tutors. But in that silence, something began to take root. It was a Wednesday. I had just wrapped up a virtual session with a 16-year-old girl named Tyra, who'd recently moved to Oregon from a small town in Idaho. Tyra was bright, quick, but always kept her head down when speaking, like she'd spent her whole life watching the floor. She started every answer with, "I guess," or "Maybe I'm wrong, but..." That posture felt painfully familiar. After class, she sent me a short message. "You're the first person who made me feel like I matter. Thank you." I read it over and over, 6 simple words, but they softened something in me I didn't realize had gone hard. I printed the message, trimmed the paper neatly, and taped it to the wall just above my bed, where a utility bill used to hang. I didn't need framed art. I just needed a sentence like that to know I still meant something. Gradually, messages like that began to appear more often. Not always emotional, not always long, but every thank you, every time someone wrote, "You explain things so clearly," or "This is the first time I felt confident reading," became a tiny beam of light in my dim little room. I started keeping a notebook where I logged teaching hours, income, and student feedback, not to show anyone, just to remind myself that there was another world beyond my mother's house, where I'd been called a burden. A quiet world, yes, but one where I was seen, not for boosting someone else, but for simply existing. One day, a high school student named Mason asked me, "Where did you go to school to learn how to teach like this?" I almost named a university, but instead I smiled and answered softly, "I learned from people who listened without interrupting." I didn't say it was my grandmother, the only person who ever let me finish a sentence without cutting in. That night, I spent hours revising an old reading comprehension guide I had written my first year of college. It was the first time I'd opened that draft on my hard drive in years. The same familiar words, the same diagrams, only now I added my name at the bottom of each page. No longer blank, no longer given away. Maybe the things I was doing would never go viral. No likes, no shares, no polished photos or impressive accolades, but they were real. They happened every day, in questions from students, in emails updating their progress, in quiet thank you glances. I started to feel something I thought I no longer had a right to: presence. Not everyone needs to be celebrated, but everyone deserves to be seen, and after years of being just a shadow in my own family, I was slowly being called by name again. Not by blood, but by those who once believed they weren't good enough to deserve help. There were no fireworks, nothing grand, but on one weekend evening, after 3 back-to-back tutoring sessions, I closed my laptop, lay back on my bed, and smiled without meaning to. But I could see it clearly. In this small corner of the world, I had rebuilt myself, brick by brick. I hadn't waited for anyone to grant me space. I walked into the light on my own, without waiting for someone to lead me out of the dark. That same evening, after finishing the week's grading for 3 students, I opened my phone to check my schedule and happened to see a push notification from social media. An old friend had reposted something from Bailey with a cheerful caption, "What a beautiful family! Love how close you all are." The photo loaded quickly. Bailey was in the center, her hair flowing, her smile radiant like nothing had ever worn her down. My mother stood on her right, arm draped loosely around her daughter's shoulder. My father was on the left, stern as always, but trying to soften his expression. At their feet sat a golden retriever named Cooper, a dog I'd only heard mentioned once during a wrong number call 3 years ago. Behind them was the familiar living room, the same chestnut velvet curtains, and the table lamp still perched on the shelf. I looked closer, and then something hit me deep in the chest. That photo now hung exactly where our old family portrait used to be, the one from a winter when I was 15 and Bailey was 11. Back then, I stood in the middle wearing a brown coat, my arm around my sister's shoulder. My mother had once said, "Maddie has Grandma Clara's smile." I remembered my father carefully adjusting the angle, making sure the frame was balanced, the lighting just right, everyone's eyes on the lens. Now in the same frame, same lighting, I was gone, no trace, as if I had never stood there at all. I zoomed in. The position on the wall hadn't changed. The faint shadow from the overhead lamp was still in the bottom corner of the frame. But instead of my face, there was the dog, wearing a red bandana. No one said anything about the switch. Not a caption, not a mention. Everything had been trimmed, replaced, rearranged so neatly it was like the old memory had never existed. I scrolled through more posts. Family dinner last Sunday. Grateful for my tribe. Couldn't ask for a better support system. Each photo was filled with laughter, gratitude, hugs, self-help quotes. But in all of them, I was either cropped out, cut off at the head or shoulders, or reduced to a hand barely visible at the edge. Part of me wanted to believe it was an accident. Maybe they hadn't noticed. Maybe they just picked the best lighting or sharpest image. But no. There were too many repetitions, too many intentional edits, too much silence to call it coincidence. I'd heard people say that to erase someone. Sometimes all you have to do is stop saying their name. I never imagined I'd become that person. The one deleted. Not because I died, not because I made a mistake, but simply because I didn't fit the story they wanted to tell. I put my phone down and leaned against the wall, eyes tracing the faint crack across the ceiling. The smell of old mildew crept in from the window seals. I sat there a long time. No tears, no dramatic grief, just hollow, like someone had been quietly siphoning the air around me for years, and I was only now noticing I'd been left behind. I thought about that new family photo. I pictured my mother lifting down the old one, wiping the dust from the glass and silently replacing it with the new frame, without me. No one protested, no one asked, no one saw anything wrong. And then I wondered, if I disappeared for good, vanished from this world on some foggy morning, would that photo change at all? Or would they just smile faintly, tidy up the space, and keep calling it family without correction? I didn't walk away to punish anyone, I just couldn't bear how they looked at me, like I was a threat to what they wanted to preserve, and now, seeing myself erased like an unwanted detail, I finally understood. They never needed me in the picture, not because I did something wrong, but because I didn't fit the version they were building. That afternoon, light rain began to fall. I was updating a set of reading guides when there was a knock at the door, soft but insistent. I stepped out, highlighter still in hand, and froze when I saw Delaney standing there, her hair soaked, coat damp, face drawn, eyes sleepless. We had been best friends in college, teaching assistants our senior year, brainstorming after-school programs together for the public high school where I taught before I left. Later, Delaney moved into web design and had once helped me build the learning platform I never got the chance to launch. She handed me a yellowed envelope tied with a thin piece of string. She didn't say anything, just placed it gently on the table near the window. I opened it. Inside was an old will, the handwriting soft and steady. It was Grandma Clara's. The document was printed on thick cream-colored paper with a faded red stamp from the local notary at the bottom. I read every line, my hands began to shake. In the final section, she wrote clearly, I leave all academic materials, instructional frameworks, notes, research, and any versions co-developed with Madeline Cooper to my granddaughter Madeline, the only person I trust to carry forward the values I've spent my life pursuing. I read it again, then again. The words weren't flowery or emotional like a letter, but they were clear, firm, and undeniable. Delaney looked at me and said softly, "I found it in the left drawer of your mom's desk, under a stack of old, faded magazines. It was just sitting there, not torn, not opened, no sign anyone ever tried." I sat down, the will still in my hands. Part of me wanted to believe maybe they forgot. Maybe my mother thought it was just an old document. But reason wouldn't let me stay that naive anymore. Delaney pulled out another folder, a few printouts, some screenshots. She flipped through the pages, pointing to familiar paragraphs, diagrams I'd spent nights refining, literacy assessment templates I'd created for a conference no one in my family ever asked about. Now, all of it was titled Bailey's Bright Steps Framework. Even the opening section, the paragraph I'd written in my dorm room during my senior year right after Grandma died, was copied word for word. Every period, every line, only the name had changed. No more Madeline. It now read, "Founded by Bailey Cooper." I couldn't breathe in that moment. It felt like someone had stripped me of the most intimate parts of myself. Not money, not fame, but memories, labor, love, trust. From the only person in my family who ever told me I was enough, without needing to prove it. I had suspected it before. I'd noticed small, familiar details on Bailey's website, but I always told myself, maybe she just learned it from the way I do things. I wasn't sure. I didn't want to believe it, but now, in front of me were every piece of proof, every paragraph, every unmistakable trace. Bailey didn't just steal the idea. She took the actual materials I created, built with all the love and respect I had for Grandma Clara, and used them to build an academy in her own name. I folded the will and held it tightly in my palm. In that moment, I didn't know if I felt anger or sorrow or just emptiness. The feeling of being stripped of what was mine in a way so calculated and cold that it almost escaped detection. It didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like being erased so quietly. No one noticed I was ever there. Delaney sat beside me without saying another word. She knew I needed the silence. But in that silence, everything echoed louder. The nights I typed curriculum with no one cheering me on. The times Grandma told me that teaching wasn't about grades, but about unlocking something inside a person. And her voice on the phone the last time we spoke. Even if the world forgets you, what you build will not be lost. Now I had proof, not just moral, legal. And if they thought I would keep staying quiet, keep disappearing from the story like I was never part of it, they were wrong this time. I'm not someone who keeps up with online news, much less goes looking for the names of people who've cut me out of their lives. But rumors spread faster than intentions. That morning, my inbox flooded with alerts from academic platforms I'd once joined. Bailey Cooper accused of plagiarizing curriculum content. Westbrook Academy terminates partnership. Request for material source verification. I opened every email, read each line. Calm, bitter. Not because I was gloating, not because I wanted my sister to fall, but because I knew if this hadn't come from the outside, my family never would have called. By 3 p.m. that day, my phone rang non-stop. First my mother, then my father, then Bailey. All three names repeated on the screen like someone was rewinding an old tape. Not out of nostalgia, but fear. I didn't pick up. I just sat there at the table, hand resting on a cold cup of tea, listening to the ringtone like it was a voice from a place I'd long since left behind. That night, I received an email from the family's legal representative. No pleasantries, no greetings, just a single PDF attachment titled, Confidential Internal Resolution Proposal. I opened it. Under the title, there it was, a 6-figure offer, $120,000. The conditions? I would have to withdraw all plagiarism allegations, delete every post and piece of evidence tied to my curriculum, and agree to never speak of the matter again in any form. I also had to keep the very existence of the offer secret. I sat frozen. I hadn't eaten all day, but I didn't feel hungry. Just the weight in my chest, like a hand tightening slowly around my heart. I wasn't surprised they chose this route. My family always preferred clean solutions. Anything that didn't fit was swept out of frame, locked behind a door, sealed with a smile and a polite, "Family matters shouldn't be public." Now they wanted me to do it again, close my eyes, swallow it down, disappear. I printed the agreement. Cheap ink smudged at the corner of the page. I didn't tear it, didn't burn it. I taped it to the wall, right next to Grandma's handwritten letter I had kept through all the years I was pushed aside, billed even when unseen. One side was a message from the only person who ever believed in me, written in slanted, soft ink full of love. The other side was a number and a list of terms, cold and clinical, like the tools they always used to control me. I stood still, staring at those two pieces of paper side by side. One was my root, the other a wound, and between them stood me, the girl who once thought she wasn't strong enough to say no. I thought of the sleepless nights I spent with Grandma Clara, revising those lesson plans. The afternoons she taught me how to listen to students not just with my ears, but with my heart. I remembered how she said, "Sometimes you won't be recognized because you're quiet. But quiet work makes a sound too. It's just that most people aren't trained to hear it." And I understood then, if I signed that agreement, I wouldn't just bury my curriculum. I'd bury her voice, her trust. I didn't need $120,000 to survive. I needed to look at myself without shame. And this time, I wasn't lowering my head. I spent the whole night getting everything ready. Not to fight back, like people say online, but to do one simple thing. State what was mine. No accusations, no insults, no hate, just truth, as complete and sharp as it had always been. I arranged the documents chronologically, from the early drafts I had co-written with Grandma Clara in my sophomore year of college, to the updated versions I'd used over years of teaching. I opened my cloud storage folder, downloaded all the time-stamped PDFs, then took screenshots of student emails, some of the earliest feedback from schools that had adopted my materials for tutoring programs. I also pulled up Grandma's will. The scanned page, though faint, clearly showed the notary seal and the clause stating all academic materials, training programs, and instructional frameworks co-developed with Madeline Cooper shall remain under the ownership and legal inheritance of my granddaughter, Madeline. I didn't book a studio, didn't edit anything. I propped up my old phone on a stack of books, lit the shot with my desk lamp. No makeup. Hair tied back, my voice was hoarse after a long day. But I hit record anyway. I didn't shout or cry. I read the will, line by line. Then I shared my screen and walked through each file, each timestamp, each original draft with my name on it. I pointed to the places Bailey's version had erased me, where my name once sat quietly in the footer, now scrubbed clean. I ended the video with one sentence, barely more than a whisper. I don't need anyone to defend me, but if truth needs a voice, today, I'm the one speaking it. I pressed publish. No hashtags. I didn't send it to anyone. I didn't ask friends to share it. I simply shut my laptop and sat still beside the wall where the legal agreement and Grandma's handwritten letter still hung. Inside me was a strange mix of weightlessness and heaviness, as if I had let go of something long carried, but had no idea what would meet me on the other side. I fell asleep close to 3 a.m. When I woke up, my phone screen was filled with messages, emails, and social media notifications. The video had already reached hundreds of thousands of views. The comments were still pouring in. But what made my throat tighten wasn't the number. It was the names showing up beneath it. A high school teacher in Ohio wrote, "I used a text analysis toolkit shared by Ms. Madeline in a professional forum back in 2018. There's no way that came from anyone else. A parent in Texas messaged, "My daughter studied a program Bailey claimed as her own. But the lessons are identical to a course we got last year from our local library, with Ms. Madeline's name on it. I know who really wrote it." Another comment, shorter, from a former student, "She was the first person who taught me not to feel ashamed when I didn't understand." Reddit began taking down Bailey's old posts, especially the ones accusing me of jealousy and failure. One was flagged in red, misrepresentation. I don't know who reported them. Maybe a stranger, maybe someone who once saw me cut out of the edge of a family photo. I didn't post a response, didn't update my status. I wasn't chasing the story anymore. I just sat in silence, warm tea in hand, staring at the screen like I was watching a piece of my life step into the light. No noise, no grand praise, but I felt people standing with me, not because they were asked to, but because they believed me. They recognized me through my work, through the way I taught, through what I once thought only grandma could see. And that, to me, weighed more than any long overdue apology. That night, the rain started falling around 11 p.m. The tapping on the metal roof made the already quiet room echo even louder, like time was slowing down, second by second. I was preparing feedback notes for a new student when I heard a knock. 3 taps, clear, not rushed, but familiar enough to make my skin prickle. I stepped out, looked through the peephole. 3 people. Bailey in the middle, raincoat still on, mascara smeared down both cheeks. My mother, on the left, her shoulders hunched, hand gripping the strap of her purse. My father on the right, hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. Regret, maybe, or just plain exhaustion. I opened the door, said nothing, neither did they, at first. Bailey looked at me, waiting for me to close the gap. My mother took a small step forward, as if about to speak, but swallowed the words. I looked at each of them, every face painfully familiar. I had spent years chasing their approval. Thought if I just tried a little harder, they'd understand. Wrote letters no one answered, sent gifts no one opened, cleared tables, cleared space, even cleared my voice so they could shine. But I wasn't in that place anymore. I shook my head softly, not with anger, not with bitterness, and not needing explanation. I simply closed the door. My hand held the knob firmly. The sound of the lock sliding into place wasn't loud, but it was final. Then I turned back to my desk. The laptop screen still glowed. A student's question was waiting. I placed my hands on the keyboard. My heart still beat steady, but no longer skipped like it used to. I wasn't the one meant to save them. And I was never born to be the life raft for people who let me drown. The next morning, I received an email with a red, bolded subject line, "Content Suspension Request." It came from an attorney representing Bailey. The message accused me of using family materials without permission, violating collective intellectual property rights. They requested the shutdown of my current website and threatened legal action if I didn't cooperate to protect the family brand. I stared at the screen, not surprised, not disappointed, just tired. I forwarded the email to Miss Hannah Pierce, my attorney, a woman in her 50s with a slow, calm voice, who once taught law at a community college before opening her own practice. I met her after discovering Grandma Clara's will, and she was the one who told me something I never forgot. You don't need to sue to reclaim what was always yours. You just need to prove it never left your hands. Less than an hour later, Hannah called me back. Her voice was steady and clear. "I've finished drafting the response. The will is valid, the notary seal intact. All curriculum materials are time-stamped with creation dates years before any of their copies. I'll file the ownership declaration tomorrow morning with both the hosting platform and the academic systems they once worked with." I listened in silence. What I felt wasn't victory or relief. It was clarity, like a fogged window finally wiped clean, not because someone opened it for me, but because I finally turned on the light. Hannah added, "I'll include your grandmother's letter in the packet. It's not just legal, it's moral proof. People like you, who build something from the ground up, deserve to have their name, not just in the footer, but on the cover page." I nodded, hand resting on my mouse. In that moment, I didn't feel angry anymore. I just felt grief. For people I once loved who had chosen to fight me with the same silence they once used to erase me. Now they wielded it as a weapon. But I wasn't silent anymore. I wasn't stepping into the dark just to keep them comfortable in the light. Bailey's website was suspended 1 week after Hannah filed the response. The homepage, once soft pastels and motivational slogans, now read in plain white text. Access temporarily disabled due to pending copyright claim. Within days, promotional posts vanished from search results. Westbrook Academy formally canceled their contract, citing ethical and academic violation. My family said nothing, no texts, no emails, no word passed through friends. Everything dissolved into a dense fog, not stormy, not loud, just a long, unspoken quiet, like rain that never announced its arrival. The kind of ending that doesn't need a closed door because the door had never been open. I still lived in my small rental apartment, still worked under the same worn desk lamp, still used the same laptop from when I first started teaching again. But in the middle of those old things, I began something new, not for fame, not out of revenge, but because I wanted something kind to begin where something once broke. I took most of my savings, earnings from tutoring, small contracts with local schools, anonymous donations that came after the story spread, and started a nonprofit. I named it the Clara Foundation. Not out of nostalgia, but because I needed a name that honored the root, the one person who taught me knowledge isn't exclusive. That light can come from even the smallest kitchen. At the end of the day, when you help a student write a single paragraph without making them feel foolish. The organization worked quietly. We provided free study materials, academic counseling for students abandoned by family or overlooked by society, the ones labeled no potential, too slow, too poor, not a good fit. I knew the look they'd been given. I had lived under it for most of my youth. One night, I received a handwritten letter mailed from an address in Missouri. The handwriting was messy, the paper cheap, but the words inside made me hold my breath. It was from a student I had taught online nearly 3 years ago, back when I was still living in that peeling-walled motel room. You were the first person who taught me I could live for myself, not for my parents, not for anyone else's expectations, but because I have the right to decide what I'm worth, even if no one else sees it. I folded the letter, made a copy, and taped it to the wall, right next to Grandma Clara's old will. No frame, no decoration, just 2 pieces of paper. One thick, one thin. One handwritten, one typed. Both holding the same truth. Proof that I had not been forgotten. No one called me again. No apologies were sent. No intermediaries came to make peace. But I no longer waited for that. I didn't start a foundation to retaliate. I didn't build a website to fight back. I didn't share the truth to shame anyone. I simply chose not to let myself disappear again. And maybe the deepest kind of freedom a person can reach is no longer needing to prove they deserve to exist. It's building your own small corner in this world and sitting firmly in it without asking for permission. Maybe you're listening now and wondering, if it were you, would you have opened the door or locked it like I did? Have you ever been pushed out of your own family just because you were different, quieter, more persistent, less flashy, not what they expected? I don't expect everyone to agree with me. But if you've ever felt erased from your family's story, ever had to carve out your worth in the silence of neglect or pain, maybe you'll understand why I chose to stand up. Not to fight anyone, but to refuse to vanish. Tell me what you think. Share your story. How long have you been quiet? If this story touched something in you, leave a comment below and follow the channel to hear more real journeys, stories of people who were once forgotten, who had to step out of their family's shadow to become fully themselves. There's more I want to share, and maybe, somewhere in all of it, there's a part of you too.